Great, thank you. Good afternoon. This is the Senate Committee on Institutions. We're here on January 28th, and our committee time was shortened because we just heard the governor's 2026 budget address, which we will not be discussing today. We are going to discuss the capital budget that was proposed tomorrow. Today we have two items. The first one is to hear from a member of the Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee, because this committee is now the IT and Institutions Committee. So we are doing some work in IT. And I'd like to invite Senator Randy Brock to the witness chair, and we'll introduce ourselves before we introduce you, Senator Brock.
I think I've said everyone.
Well, it's the public.
Senator Russ Ingles, Essex District. How are you, sir? Nice to see you. Good to see you as well.
Senator Joe Major, Windsor.
Senator Rob Munkett.
Senator Sam Douglas from Orleans.
Okay, Senator Wendy Harrison, thank you for being here. And we have our new committee assistant, Magali. So thank you for
I
being
used to
here.
work with Magali before.
All right, great. We did together last year.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so Senator Brock is here, and I invited Senator Brock because he had some really compelling statements that you made at the most recent joint or JITOC meeting. JITOC will continue to exist, which I think is a good thing, because we need, there's no short, there's plenty of oversight to be had in this area. So I'm glad this committee and the new committee in the House won't be the only folks looking at that. And specifically, what we'd really like to hear from you, Senator, are any observations you have overall about how the process works, and any specific recommendations you have for this committee, understanding that we are a brand new committee with new jurisdiction.
The JITOC, Joint Information Technology Oversight Committee, was a committee that was formed, as I recall, somewhere around 2016 or so. So it's been in existence for some years. And one of the reasons historically that it was brought into being is because there was nobody watching the story. And information technology in the state of Vermont was, if not at its infancy, it was very, very fragmented. And there were considerable concerns about the leadership structure, if any, of information technology. And you had a background in which new technology products were created and installed and designed and put into place by the mandarins who headed the agency in which that particular project resided. There was no independent or truly independent chief information officer for the state, or for that matter, there was no one who was really in charge of information technology. And although even for several years after that, there was a CIO title, the person didn't really act as a CIO, and you sort of had the Wild West. And what you often had is technology products that not only didn't work, but were ill-designed, didn't talk with each other, and within the state, and it was very interesting. I remember the first meeting, because I was the first chair of the committee, we brought in the chief information officers, such as they were, of each of the three branches of government. And they'd never met. They'd never met. And so as a result, you had the classic situation in which the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing, and by and large didn't care. And that has been a challenge for a considerable while this organization was in place, of ensuring that the legislative IT and the judiciary's IT and the state's IT actually were in a coordinated path. And although they're independent branches of government, there were pieces of everything that they did that matched with one another. When we started JITOC, the other issue, certainly as far as the Senate was concerned, and realistically as far as the House was concerned, there was no legislative committee of jurisdiction that really had technology as its function, certainly in the Senate, and indeed up until right now, we kind of, on an ad hoc basis, wound up putting it in finance committee, which needless to say has enough to do. And it was a challenge to make sure that the bandwidth was there because the finance committee has not only finance and raising of revenue, but it also has public utilities, it has healthcare financing, it has regulatory oversight, it has insurance, it has a whole portfolio of things. And I think it was healthy that it be moved to another committee. And one of the reasons it wasn't moved before was part of the concern was that there wasn't expertise, or at least enough expertise about information technology in any committee in the Senate to give it due good. The first charge that this committee started out with was just trying to get away of the landscape to find out things, basic things like how many applications do we have, and who owns them, and what's the state of their update or their upkeep. Which ones of them are considered robust, perhaps by its users and by anybody looking at it independently, and are they in need of repair? The information security landscape. Who's in charge of information security? And what authority do they have? And of the applications and processes that we have on technology, how many of them are secure? How many of them have risks? And how do we classify those risks? How do we rate them? We started out with a fairly simple system. First, let's go get an inventory of how many systems do we have. Nobody can count. And this was done a long time ago. And there's been a dramatic improvement, but it is by no means perfect right now where we are. We have situations in which there is a risk or a flaw in which the committees that might have jurisdiction, and in some cases they question whether or not they even know that the risk occurred. And typically, it reverted back to the history that information technology and the applications belong to the person or the commissioner or the secretary who was in charge of the area in which that particular function operated, but not recognizing the fact that IT crosses lines, and it crosses lines frequently, and what those lines are and what's connected to what, we're not well known, not well looked at. So among the things that we did to start out with was just get an inventory of every system we had. And then on a very basic basis, say, if we're going to rate them in terms of security or vulnerability or the need for repair, the need to replace because they're about to fall over because they're old and there's nobody alive that even knows how to use the code anymore. And so what we did is we did initially we required an inventory to be done of all the systems we had, and the number was daunting. And then we did some very basic things, like at least as far as each of these major areas of concern, we rated them in red, yellow, and green. So that we could try to prioritize what needed to be looked at first. And frankly, it took several years of meetings because this is a committee that meets off time. It is not a standing committee because there was really no standing committee doing this. And I would like to have done something much more intensive than what was actually done. But what was done was what we could do based on the resources we had and the people we had, the time we had, and the prioritization of it. Among the things that we also did is we noticed that where there were big projects that were coming about that did have cross-departmental implications and import of strengthening the ability of the information, the Joint Fiscal Office to provide some oversight and to hire someone as an expert so that we could get an independent view. And we've gone through two of them. I think we're on the second or perhaps the third, at least the second at this point. So that when we did have big development projects that were moving, to have someone independent who had the technical knowledge to look at those systems and say, very much like an information technology audit, which is what, I by the way, in terms of background, my later career was with Fidelity Investments, the largest privately held financial services company in the nation. And I was the chief of risk and the risk oversight group, which included security, fraud, information technology, security, compliance and internal audit and a few other departments like that. So my job in that company was to oversee what could go wrong. And so if you're gonna lose your money, make sure you're not gonna lose it in things other than your investments.
Mm.
And the function there was very much like what more than what the chief information officer reported to me, was to figure out what do we need to do in order to ensure that this is safe and reasonable, is working as intended, that we have the right people doing the right things, and that if something goes wrong, we find out about it other than reading about it in the newspaper. And it was obviously a challenge in a company that operated both in the US with offices throughout the United States and then elsewhere in the world. The job I had before I took that one was as a general auditor for Fidelity, and before that I had an international administration, administrative activities, including this function outside North America. I think have made some progress here, but I think we still have a long way to go. We have one person, Lisa Goldman, who you should meet if you haven't already, who does some of the oversight work for us and reports back and looking at systems as they're being developed. We now have a chief information officer, and this is the second chief information officer that we've had. And she, I think, has the right thoughts. We have an information technology organization that runs on a parallel track with information technology being developed in the business units. But it does so with its own expertise and with some rules, so that you can't have the cowboy approach, which was what we had in 2017, 18, 19, and so on, in which people would develop systems because that's what the Mandarin in charge of the group wanted to do, and the heck with anything else. And then you would come in and you'd look at the system was developed and you just sort of shake your head. And we still have a few of those that are hanging around, but they're fast, I think, being dealt with.
Is it the Agency of Digital Services that you're saying is
Yes.
okay?
Is the agency that exists now. Chief Information Officer is the person who heads that
Okay.
agency.
Great.
And there are standards that do apply across the enterprise, at least they apply insofar as they apply to the executive branch, and the legislative branch has largely adopted them sort of not as formally as I would have liked. And the judiciary still has a tendency, I think, to go off on its own a bit, and that concerns me a bit.
Are you okay to pause for questions? Because we have a
Certainly.
couple. Okay.
A couple, I just want to make sure that at home or.
Oh, Magali, I think we should have.
Oh, they see it large.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
All right.
Thank you for noticing.
Yeah.
Okay, did you have another?
Yes, I actually did. So the assessment started in 2016, is
It
that
really started, the first project started in 2017.
2017?
And they were limited and they were beginning, it's really more an information collection and trying to understand what it is we're looking at.
What did the pandemic uncover? Did it slow down your job, or did it really reveal more things?
I don't know that it revealed, I can't recall a whole lot that revealed because there was a lot of stuff that wasn't being done very well
Yeah.
before the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it was not a time in which we really expected
Mhm.
that it was going to dramatically improve. It was much more the first part of this organization's mission was really to assess the landscape of what it is that we're dealing with. And I think we were able to do that, but not as fast as we would have had there not been this pandemic that really slowed everything down and slowed our ability to easily interact with each other and with other groups.
Senator Nichols?
Senator, you're keeping us in suspense. How many systems did you find?
I forgot.
Did you bring
And I
the
couldn't
list?
tell you if I knew.
I hope you brought the list.
But we did, I don't have it with me, but I
Okay.
do have it at least at that time.
Okay.
And again, that is one of the problems now, is the continuity of some of the things that the committee did in its periodic basis and what it mandated did not keep up with the need. And that's why I think it's really important that there be a committee of jurisdiction that does many of the things that JITOC wound up trying to do and perhaps didn't do as effectively because it wasn't there all the time. And the committee of jurisdiction either had no time and not the degree of expertise that it needed to do it and to oversee it. So that was an issue. And
Okay,
still is an
so,
issue.
so I would appreciate getting more detail on exactly what you're saying.
Sure, I can
What are
give
the
you, for
things
example,
that
the information regarding the systems at that time, and that has in fact been updated. I can get you that information.
Okay, and who, what,
And again,
where's that kept? Who's the,
right now, the Agency of Digital Services has that, and also, JFO has it.
okay,
Lisa has it. I believe she should have all that.
okay. that's all.
And not, at least those things that are public, I've got in terms of just, what our initial assessments were. Yeah, we did, certainly have some meetings or parts of meetings, in executive session, because when you're talking about the security of applications and, risks that have befallen the organization, things that have gone wrong or that we are concerned may be going wrong, those things were done in executive session.
Okay, do you have your, red, green and yellow list?
I have the original red, green and yellow list, yes.
I would find that
Goes back-
helpful, I mean,
yeah.
even though it's a little,
Yeah.
just to.
Yeah.
see the-
I mean, I would say that your conversations about the risk assessment process should be with the Agency of Digital Services now, because they had that function on an ongoing basis thereafter, and we did not go back and probe on a global basis like that since then. In retrospect, I think it probably would have been a good idea to do that.
Okay. Other questions that folks have?
So,
Yes,
so right now, the Agency of Digital Services has a product dashboard. Are you familiar with this?
I'm not entirely aware. I'm aware of it,
Yeah,
but
so this is
I can't put an expert on
for ADS then.
Yeah.
Frankly, some of the people in the room might just ask afterwards. Because it seems like that's what they have for projects.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's all of the projects. Right now, it seems like there's ADS with the executive, there's a legislative difference and judiciary.
Yeah, that's
So there-
right.
there's
Those
still-
folks, you have to keep after them to meet and talk with each other. That is a continuing problem. And in particular, some organization, judiciary was one that would develop an application, and you look at the application and you say, where did this come from? And you're not sure you've got all the information. That's one of my concerns in the last couple of years. I know judiciary had a number of independent projects because they ran into a number of technology issues during and after the pandemic. There are a lot of things that go on in judiciary, for example, that don't necessarily overlap, that don't use the same systems, don't always use the same technology that we do in the executive branch. But in some cases, one may at least partially back up the other systems, although again, by and large, they're separate.
okay, so the financial systems. Can you talk a little bit about that? Just our budget system and our payroll system, or maybe not our payroll system,
Well,
that's a whole.
we've had a variety, and again, I think Lisa and her group can give you, I think, much more detail that makes sense in terms of which systems are in place and how they're interconnected, which systems have been replaced and are relatively new. The information from Lisa Garvin in terms of the evaluation of those systems for checks and balances and so on, all of that is available, and I would rather than wing it on the top of my head, I would suggest that you get the information from them.
Okay, and she's coming later this week, which is tomorrow.
Yeah.
So could you talk about if this is something that you'd be willing to just look at as, just process?
Mhm.
And have there been, are there processes that ended up in a good result versus processes that have ended up in a bad result? Because I'm interested as we begin this study. I mean, we're building as we learn, right? But it would be helpful, I think, to have an example of something that went well and,
Well, I
and
think
kind of
it's
parse
much easier
that
to think
out.
of things that didn't go quite.
I know, exactly.
That's the ones
But,
that stand out.
right, well, I heard that the DMV
That
system,
DMV,
I mean,
yeah,
that seems to have gone
That
well.
was the second try.
Okay,
And we had a DMV system that was replaced, and I don't know how many $1 million was spent on that system, and it was a failure. It flopped. The second try of the system, I think, my impression is that it went relatively well. But it's sort of, in comparison to what happened before.
okay,
And the first attempt at the Healthcare Connect went terribly, millions of dollars.
I mean, the ball was dropped in a lot of cases, and part of it is we didn't have a chief information officer that was truly the kind of chief information officer that a state does. We had an increasing complexity of technology also as technology advanced, and some of our stuff and people did not keep up. We had organizational issues, and that organizational issue of who owns this and who's in charge was also an issue that complicated things. And then our oversight mechanism could have been better. You have a committee that meets periodically during the summer, once or twice a month, is not sufficient to effectively oversee an organization. It is sufficient at being able to give, I think, a global impression that this needs improvement, and that there's some bumps here, and that we should make sure that the people who are the leaders of these organizations are in fact communicating appropriately with each other, and where there is something that goes wrong, to at least hold a hearing or two to find out what went wrong, what broke down, how did it affect people, and what's the likelihood of it happening again, have controls been put in place. That we did through executive sessions and other kinds of meetings and discussions, and then hearing from people in the agencies that were affected. It's, you can't solely rely on the chief information officer to tell you what's going wrong. You've got to talk to other people in the organizations that are affected. And desirably, if you have more time, in my experience in these things, is talk with people at various levels of the organization.
mhm,
Ideally, to the extent that you can, where something really goes wrong and it's justified under a law to do an executive session, because what you always get the story. People don't come in as leaders of organizations and say, I really screwed up and I messed this up and we lost $5 million. And if I'd done it, that, as much as you'd like it to happen, doesn't happen. And you don't always get the straight story from listening to one person. You listen to multiple people. And I think that's appropriate.
that's good, Rose.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The reason I asked about the pandemic question was I know that you having run a business, and when the pandemic hit and the unemployment system in particular was woefully underutilized initially, and then
And then it crashed.
Yeah.
It just flat crashed. And then, and when things like that crash, then you got an enormous increase in the amount of fraud. And you have fraudulent claims or improper claims. And then you have an organization that is not able to or capable of keeping track of it or monitoring it. And I'm still in economic development. I'm still asking the Labor Department for numbers as to what was the extent of the claims that were improperly applied. You take unemployment, I think it was between the 10 years prior to 2015, I think, I swear to those dates, we lost $55 million in improper claims that were paid. And people can't really tell you precisely what happened and what kind of claims and where, except that number comes up. And during that period of time, and even until quite recently, you could steal from unemployment and it wasn't a crime. It was not a criminal penalty, which I just found astounding. We added it back in, and it's still weak a year or two ago.
And then there are also folks who aren't getting unemployment who should be getting it.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah,
issues on both sides.
there are issues on both sides. Yeah, that it was an elderly system.
And it's
And as
still,
And it's under repair. It's, there's a plan as we held meetings on it, and, I think there are differences of opinion. The last time we had, what did we have? It's the vote in the committee. I think we had 2 opposed and 4 in favor of moving forward. Maybe Mel was one opposed, wasn't it? One opposed. And then the rest moved forward because we had to do something at the end of December. Otherwise, we would have lost a significant amount of money, but it wasn't perfect. And even when we have Lisa, and I think she's confident we had someone before her doing that role, there were a lot of things that weren't done, were not done well. And reading that last report, when you see the things that are deficiencies that come out in the evaluation, I think it's very telling.
And when you say last report,
That was a report that was presented to us in December
okay, on that system alone or on?
on that system, on that.
That was the
That
ERP. That was
ERP.
Oh, the ERP, okay.
Yeah, not the UI.
Okay. All right, so we'll get that report if we don't have it already.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wish you good luck.
There's definitely plenty to do. And I'm actually glad the House has a committee that has fewer jurisdictions than we do, but includes IT.
Yeah.
So I think that's a benefit also.
Yeah, I mean, the committee was, very involved in lots of things that we're doing. But its role basically was oversight that was much more specific, as well as kind of general, but it wasn't operating or managing or overseeing the activities on a day-to-day basis to say that they're on target or not. That was not the role of the activity. It was oversight.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. And it might be good to have you back.
Yeah, I'm happy to come back, and
Okay.
if there's any particular area that I can go and refer, I have copious notes and documents, unclassified, of course, that I can refer to. It would help.
That would be great. And Jai Talk will continue, is my understanding. So,
Good, I think it should.
yes.
I think it should certainly be the coverage of that gap. When the legislature is not in session, and maybe some members of the committee of jurisdiction ought to be on
I think
time to help that happen and to make sure that there's true continuity.
Yes.
Yeah, well, you're on.
I'm on. Oh, okay.
All right. No, I think that's really important.
Senator Weeks is the.
Senator Weeks was the other one, yes.
I don't think they were going to put that.
Okay. Well, they will eventually.
They will eventually, and the key is sometimes being on oversight committees can make people mad. And you have to understand that. We also have some folks who come to the committees who make people mad, and you have to recognize that.
Thank you very much. Okay. Appreciate your time.
Thanks for that shout out.
I was looking for the word.
Okay. And we are actually,
That's actually everything on that agenda.
we have corrections at 3
Right, but for the judge.
for the Jai Talk part, right?
Just.
Right. It was Randy or Senator Brock, and it was exactly a half an hour, and he stuck to his time. Any conversation about that? I very much appreciate him being here, and we can get him back. I would like to see the old the first list,
Yeah.
just to see it, and just to get an idea of the scope.
I think we should talk about the list of people that we should bring in here that will make.
Mm-hmm. And we already have
Just
the
get-
person that said it's the most important, but yes.
Sounds like we won't get rid of that. Yeah.
Oh, the
List
people
of-
that were gonna
list
get
of people
mad.
that were-
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I think we should be prepared to think, well, I won't say that.
Yeah.
We'll just see what happens. We will do our job and see what happens, and deal with it at the time. Okay, do you have any comments about anything? Okay, all right, so we have 15 minutes. Great, and then we will see, folks, the corrections workforce, Steve Howard will be here at 3 o'clock, so until then, we